Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
So here we are, off-season episode number 9. And we're actually coming to the end of our off-season. There'll only be one more off-season episode, and that's going to be a special episode.
Yeah, we can kind of, we're teasing our first guest of the podcast on, so we'll have that coming up next week, which I think will be a lot of fun.
That's right. Somebody actually wanted to come on with us, and we'll tease out that it was a former Major League Baseball player. So how about that? And we're really looking forward to sharing that with you in our next off-season episode, which will be the last. Today, though, we're going to talk about statistics and how statistics today have become obviously much broader, and
there's a lot more of them too.
There's a lot more of them, and it's very different than when I was a kid and there was no ESPN. If you can remember a time, you can't, before the internet.
I certainly can.
Right. So you would get all your statistics from printed material, mostly newspapers, magazines.
I mean, you always talk about how you'd find me just poring over the box stats as a kid.
Right, and so that's, even when you were a kid, that was kind of the way that it was.
You said that's what you used to do, is you would just sit there and study the box scores.
Yeah, I've been a believer. A lot of people used to try to teach math by teaching boys baseball statistics because it's all percentages, obviously, and so when you were growing up, there were some key statistics: home runs for batters, RBIs, batting average, on base average, slugging percentage. Well, even on base wasn't that super popular when I was.
You would really say that on base wasn't even really considered a thing as an important statistic until Billy Beane and the Moneyball A's kind of came around, and they were the first team to really value that at the expense of other stats. Other people would pay attention to it, but that's like the first example I can really think of a team placing more emphasis on that particular statistic.
I think that it certainly wasn't a regular discussion. You were maybe aware that a guy walked a lot and maybe got on base more than other guys.
You would never look at you might look at a guy that was fast and got on base a lot, and he would be like, oh, he's a good leadoff hitter. That's a valuable thing. But a guy that wasn't stealing bases, nobody cared that he walked a lot.
And there was a lot of anomalies out there where you had guys that seemed to be fast and were stolen base guys that had terrible OBAs when you go back and you look at what they're going, wow, the guy only got on base 32% of the time.
Right. And then you look at how often they got caught stealing and you realize this guy was actually like a net negative on your team.
So let's play a little game here. I'm going to throw out a bunch of stats, and you're going to tell me if you think those statistics are less or more important today than they were, let's say, 30 years ago. So we'll go back to, let's say, around 1990.
Okay.
So because that's that's a good break point.
Yeah, that's a decent break point. I would agree with that.
So growing up, sacrifice flies were a stat that you still track today. Are they more or less important?
I find it to be a pretty meaningless statistic in terms of counting the statistic itself. Sacrifice flies are definitely something that's valuable within the context of a single game.
Like a 2-2 game in the bottom of the 8th inning.
Having a sacrifice fly is totally a valuable thing and something good for a batter.
And the commentator's saying, hey, he's got to think about getting the ball in the air here.
But I would never, ever make any kind of judgment about a player's worth based upon the number of sacrifice flies that he got within a particular season or career.
Eddie Murray, the Hall of Famer, holds the Major League record for most sacrifice flies in a career. That they even track that surprised me a little bit. 128. And what does that even mean?
And realistically, you're thinking, so you're telling me that a Hall of Fame batter for you intentionally got out 128.
Well, he didn't intentionally get out.
Well, that's what a sacrifice is supposed to be. You're intentionally giving yourself up. Granted, you're getting a positive outcome from it. But you'd have to say, okay, if Murray swung and tried to get a hit, what would be the difference if he had tried to get a hit on all 128 of those? Because some of them would have still been fly balls that got the run home.
He wouldn't have 128 total RBIs.
Right. He would have less, but would he have created more value in those situations by not giving himself up and instead getting a hit?
Well, I think the way baseball is played today by managers, I think that's a point I think you're making, which is managers are less willing now to give up outs. Right, so sacrifice bunts, even with the lack of the pitcher hitting in the American League, so you have fewer sacrifice bunts in the American League than the National League managers are bunting with their pitcher less and less, although the pitchers hit worse and worse over the years because they just don't practice it and don't do it very much. So sacrifice bunts, are more or less important today than they were 30 years ago?
I think they're less important, but that just has to do with the changing nature of the game. Back at 30 years ago, and especially as the farther back you go, you actually had more outs. You were already kind of just giving up by having that guy in the lineup. Like, it wasn't uncommon to have 2 or 3 guys at the bottom of your order hitting like 240 or less.
Yeah.
So like if you had that, if your 7, 8, and 9 guys literally actually couldn't hit for the most part, that's going to be very different because you're already giving up those outs anyway. So a sacrifice is a way of at least ensuring that that out you're giving up is having a positive result.
Right. Your 8 hitter gets on base, and the pitcher's going to come up and bunt him over. If the 8 hitter's leading off the inning, right, he gets on a walk. The pitcher bunts him over. You go on a runner. You feel that's like the best outcome you could have at the bottom of your lineup.
Exactly. But now only really it's your pitcher that can't hit. And if you're in the American League, you're like, wait a second, my 8 hitter just got on base, and now my 289 hitter is coming up to bat. Why am I going to take the bat out of his hands?
No, exactly, and that's the difference in the way managers value. You only get 27 outs in a game, and giving them up is something that they're much less willing to do today.
And it's why it's why you see so much fewer guys. I guess so many less, so much fewer. I'm not sure the best way to say it, but you see so many guys. Like, why swinging early in the count is such a big issue nowadays. Because if you're going to swing at an early pitch in the count and just like take yourself out of that, you're hurting your team so much more because every out that you give up is just so much more meaningful these days.
So back to sacrifice flies for a second. You may or may not be aware that they have changed the credit for a sacrifice fly as to whether it is a time at bat or not over the history of Major League Baseball. And we won't go into it, but it has changed where it used to be a time at bat and it would count against your batting average. And then it didn't count as it does not count now, right? So if you get a sacrifice fly, you're not credited with a time.
But the problem is how do you differentiate? See, it's like, to me, with a sacrifice bunt, I can understand why it doesn't count against your at bats because you're clearly doing something different than you would be in a normal at bat. But how do I tell the difference between a guy that tried to get a hit and just happened to hit a fly ball and a guy that intentionally did so?
Well, you're doing a really good job of basically making the argument as to why baseball went back and forth because they had the same issue with that.
Yeah, like
is the sacrifice fly was it just an accident
or was it? To me, that's why it's like
sacrifice
fly should just count. It should count against your average because regardless, you took the swing at the ball, so the chance of there being something at a high greater variance is a lot more likely than a guy bunting the baseball.
So oddly enough, 5 teams have collected 3 sacrifice flies in 1 inning. Think about that for a second.
Yeah, how does that even work? Well, how would you get 3 in the same inning? Because it would have to be like, how would you have a sacrifice where it didn't result in an out?
It basically is there's errors, that didn't happen, so that you get credit for the sacrifice fly, but the out wasn't made.
Oh, so like you would have had the sacrifice fly, but the outfielder literally dropped the ball,
so it becomes an error. You get credited with a sacrifice fly,
and you get to go on base without the out being recorded.
So I just thought that was kind of interesting that actually happened 5 times.
Yeah, the fact that it happened 5 times is wild.
In 1 inning is is pretty something. So okay, how about Let's go to some pitching stats.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. I think one that really struck me when I was a kid that was really important, and even to a certain degree today, are pitcher appearances, total appearances by a pitcher in a season, right? So that if a guy pitched 88 times, remember the Mets had
Pedro Feliciano.
Okay, you remember them. We're Met fans, right? Pedro, the guy pitched like almost every single day. I think he had 80 or 90
That was
appearances.
Blevins one year too. Jerry Blevins was like that,
so
because he would just show up in
times,
like every game.
Now with the new rule, and again, I still can't find out for the rule for the next year, for this season coming up, I should say, whether or not the reliever has to pitch to 3 batters.
That wasn't part of the announcement they made where they said no DH.
I haven't been able to find anything about it, but let's say that that's still in there. That's going to create more or less appearances. You would think fewer, right? If you were overall appearances for a pitcher, if he has to pitch to 3 instead of bringing him in the game for 1 hitter and taking him out.
That limits guys like Feliciano and Blevins from appearing in a million games because those guys would come in and pitch to 1 left-hander and immediately get taken out. So that guy can pitch, like 5 days in a row sometimes.
And so your team views you as, a guy. So is a pitcher appearances more, less, or even the same as it's always been, actually? That's a possibility too.
I think it's a pretty meaningless statistic.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So having a rubber arm, being able to go out there and throw 85 times, 90 times.
The problem is without the context of how many innings you're pitching, it's not particularly helpful because, yeah, you threw that guy out 85 times, but if he threw 70-something innings because he only went out there to get one out at a time, isn't that valuable?
I think the argument is that having a pitcher who's virtually ready to go out there and pitch every single day or almost every single day is a confidence for the manager to be able to have somebody out there, and it's valuable to the team.
Right, but to play devil's advocate here, if you have a guy that you have to go to every single day, that's probably not a great thing for your overall staff because
that's a whole nother
he's
story.
probably not your closer or your best reliever, so why is this guy getting in the game every day?
So we did appearances, and how about starts for a pitcher? Like there used to be, in the days of four-man rotations, having 35 starts in a season was a number that was really important. Very rarely do pitchers get 35 starts today.
To give context to us, I'll actually say this for pitcher appearances. The one thing it'll give you is the durability of the guy.
Right.
It's the one thing it'll kind of tell you. But I value starts a little bit more because I value my starters' availability more so than a reliever's
And that also speaks to health as well.
Yeah.
Pitcher health.
Pitcher health.
Right.
And it's more meaningful to me because a reliever might have a low number of appearances in a season just because of context of the games. If you're a really good closer or a ninth inning guy and your team is always up by a bunch or down by a bunch in the ninth inning, you might not get that many appearances in a given season just because your team.
Right.
Whereas with a starter,
right,
you got to be ready.
And all the good teams, would like to start their 2 or 3 best pitchers and only have, if in their perfect world, it would be a 2 or 3 man rotation. I'd like to pitch Jacob deGrom every game if I could.
Yeah, I'm sure if I'm the Mets, your ideal progression of events would be Jacob deGrom for 7 innings. The bullpen figures it out for 2, and you can do that 30 times in a season.
Today, that's about right. That's 30 to 32 starts is about where pitchers fall.
And I think, for me, I'm not concerned about a guy unless he's dipping under the 25 marker. Mm-hmm. If he's dipping under the 25, especially on a consistent basis, that's telling me this is a guy that's injury prone.
And it affects your entire staff, as we all know, because now you got all kinds of guys pitching.
And injury prone doesn't always mean big injuries like Thor's or Syndergaard's if, you're not a Met fan where, you're missing giant swaths of a season. It can just be that guy that at one point during the season, he's going to take a 2-week trip to the DL, no matter what. Yep. There's guys like that there's going to be some point in time where he's going to miss, not a significant period of time, but not an insignificant period either.
So associated with starts is another stat that wasn't around when I was a kid. It kind of came around, I don't know, maybe sometime just before 2000, maybe in the 90s. Mm-hmm. It would be quality starts. Okay, does everybody know what a quality start is?
Let's give the definition of what a quality start is.
I believe it still is 6 innings.
It's 6 innings,
3 runs or less.
So I thought it was 2. I thought it was
3.
2.
It's definitely 3 runs or less. So because it was a 4.5 ERA, I always said, "Well, is that really that good?"
Yeah,
they gave up 3 runs in 6 innings. That's a 4.5 ERA.
But if you told a team going into a season, every single day, your pitcher is going to give you your starting pitcher will give you 6 innings and 3 runs or less. You would be like, sign me up for that.
So it's a barometer. But what kind of stat do you think that is? Is it more, less important, unimportant? What do you think?
I think it's more valuable today. And the reason being is pitchers don't throw as many innings that they used to throw. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a guy that puts together a lot of quality starts, that is 6. You think about it, that's 6 innings of 3 runs or less you're getting out of that guy. That's a big deal in today's major league.
Right. This isn't, if you go back to baseball around the turn of the 20th century, Jack Chesborough of the Yankees won 41 games. It's the most a pitcher ever has won in one season in 1904 for the Yankees. And I think he had something like 55 starts. He pitched a complete game almost. Baseball isn't like that today. So
guys don't last 6 innings unless they're actually pitching well.
Right. And particularly now, and as you get obviously further into the season in the playoffs, if the guys don't have it, they don't even get to the third inning.
Yeah, you don't get through the third inning. So I think quality starts if you have guys like Jacob deGrom, again, just to reference him, guys like him, Max Scherzer, Verlander, Kershaw when he was really in his dominant prime. Like those guys, they give you quality starts almost every time they go out there. And that's what makes them the top line starter, is because quality start to me pretty much means I have gone out there and given my team a chance to win the ball game.
And I haven't killed my bullpen.
Yeah.
I mean, the manager puts out his number 1 or his number 2 going, please save my bullpen.
Because it's a lot more painful when Jacob deGrom only goes 2 innings and when Doug Peterson only goes 2 innings. Because you kind of expect that to happen with a young rookie like that every once in a while. Or with the journeyman at the back end of your rotation. You know there's going to be a start or two in there where he just kind of implodes. But you also know you're going to get that against a bunch of teams too where, random 5th starter for the Phillies decided it was their turn to implode against the Mets, and you get a 14-1 laugher where you didn't really have to try that much.
Yeah, well, they don't get enough of those.
But you get more than you think because you remember the ones that happen to you a lot more than the ones you do to other people.
So 2 other starting pitcher stats, I guess they would be. First would be complete games. Now, it's a different era, right?
Yeah, it's hard to say how valuable they are.
It doesn't hardly even happens.
No, yeah, I think it's something that's less valuable now just because of how unusual it is.
Right. I feel like it just and how like that's a thing now. If you complete the game, and the pitchers in the 80s, even into would laugh and go complete games. Maddox and those guys threw tons of complete games. Not compared to Gibson, by the way, and Seaver and Koufax and those guys who did it even more.
But that's just because the hitters now you can't throw at 95% anymore unless you're like a superstar pitcher. 90 because we've all seen games where like you can tell the guy like doesn't have as good stuff that day. Right. I've seen DeGrom not have it. I've seen Scherzer not have it. I've seen all the top pitchers, and you can tell when they're having to battle and work to get out. But if you're not that level of pitcher, when you have to battle, you're battling for your life.
They talk about pitchers trying to win without their best stuff. The best pitchers, like they didn't really have it. Kershaw didn't have it, but he managed through guile, experience to, work his way through the order. And managers look at these, guys, and they'll stick a little longer with those guys than they would at the end. But, Ron Darling, who does the Met games here in the New York area on SNY, always talks about, when he was pitching, having something a little extra for the late in the game when you face
can't do that anymore.
You can't play baseball like that now.
You can't be like, I'm going to hold, 10%
through 2 miles an hour in my fastball and bring it out to throw to Mike Trout or something like that in the 8th inning.
No, you're throwing as hard as you can.
You're not in the game in the 8th inning if that's what you're doing.
No, because if you've been holding that little bit back, they've hit you by that point.
So another stat also would be innings pitched. We'd always use 200 innings pitched for a good starting pitcher as a barometer of what would be a season that you help your team because you put up 200 innings.
See, I disagree because it's just like, okay, but what were the quality of those 200 innings? If you gave me 200 innings of 5 ERA ball, how valuable was that for my team?
Well, and you're right that there are pitchers, and I'm going to not think of one off the top of my head. I should.
Bartolo.
Bartolo is nearly a Hall of Fame pitcher. I mean,
but he had a bunch of seasons towards the back end of his career where he pretty much...
he was 75 years old. Give the guy a break.
Don't get me wrong, I love Bartolo, and I would totally make an argument that he actually does maybe belong in the Hall of Fame. But what I'm saying is you have a guy like that who's just going to go out and eat innings for you. But that's all he's really doing is just killing innings.
We're talking about the same thing. So there are some, let's see, number 3 and number 4 starters who every year, Odorizzi is a good example of a good pitcher who when he was healthy gave you a lot of innings, and you knew that you could count on the guy. He wasn't going to be the best pitcher, but he wasn't going to kill your bullpen. He was going to keep your team in the game, even if they weren't always quality starts. And I'm not picking on Odorizzi. It's just the name that came to mind.
It's the kind of thing where like a good team is worried about having a guy like that. The same way the good team is worried about having the 4th outfielder that can really play good defense for you and maybe can steal a base and has some speed. A team that is trying to tinker with their team and compete for a World Series values a guy that's going to be able to eat innings for you so you don't go to your bullpen. But a crappy team that's just trying to survive, that guy doesn't really help them that much.
Well, no, it doesn't help them, but somebody's got to pitch.
Somebody's got to pitch, right?
So you're a bad team, so you know what? Thank you. Go out there and
put up some innings for us. I'm just saying if I was a GM or a manager, I'd rather cycle through young guys trying to see if I had something than have some rando guy out there eating innings for me for the sake of eating innings.
Who you're paying $8 million a year to pitch? I'm sorry, the guy's going to pitch even if he gets hammered.
I just wouldn't have gotten him in the first place. That's all I'm saying.
So a couple of more pitcher stats, and one of them is one we know well, wins, and I think everybody understands that pitcher wins. The value of those have certainly changed.
Oh well, it changes for the same reason that we don't value. You don't have guys pitching the whole game anymore. So because of that, like if if I don't know if when Felix Hernandez went like 13 and 12, 13 and 12 for the Mariners,
won the Cy Young,
that tells you the only thing that
and DeGrom won it with
because that's what it's not about. Getting wins is as much a function. It's like the same reason why we've devalued, to bring up a hitter statistic, RBIs.
So 100% agree, and a win was important more than 30 years ago, but even 30 years ago was way more important as an evaluator.
You were pitching, when a guy came in, when you had your number one starters, they would throw so many more innings. They were a lot more directly responsible for the outcome of a game. Nowadays, because it's not uncommon for a pitcher to come out and then 4 more pitchers come in after him, if the third out of those 4 guys blows it, that doesn't mean that guy had a bad day that day. Whereas back then, he would throw 7 to 8 innings every single time. So the game was generally decided in those 7 or 8 innings.
Yeah, guys like Seaver and Carlton,
exactly,
when they were pitching. So, in the 60s, guys pitched all those innings and do that, and today they pull you a lot quicker.
If you're and so it's like, I'm never going to judge a guy based off of the number of wins he's getting, because I've been a Met fan for the past 3 years and watched Jacob deGrom, and ain't nobody going to tell me he's not been the best pitcher in baseball.
yeah, exactly. So the idea is that wins are not valued as highly as they will never be valued as highly again, and it's a bit of a subjective stat in that to get a win, a pitcher has to pitch 5 innings, complete 5 innings, and if not, if he doesn't, then the official score, and we're gonna do a show about official scoring because it just is really interesting.
Think about it. In baseball's the only sport where you have this guy making essentially a subjective decision about how statistics will be awarded. So the starting pitcher only goes 4 innings. He gets to just pick who gets the win that day.
Who is the most effective guy? Let me see.
No other sport has literally anything like that.
Well, he decides it on errors as well, right?
Exactly.
Errors, and like, was that an error? Was that a hit? Let me think about it.
Yeah.
And sometimes they change their mind during the game. They say, well, that was ruled an error.
If you've ever been there, you'll see it like 2 innings later, they'll be like, in blank's last at bat was ruled an error.
So how about for pitchers, last one, earned run average?
I think we're seeing the slow devaluing of that statistic, less because it's in and of itself, it's not a valuable statistic, and more we're just getting better ways of understanding how to break that statistic down. Because what ERA can't account for is bad defense, and not bad defense in making errors, since that's obviously a pretty big part of ERA, but rather your team doesn't have the defensive range to get to balls that an average major leaguer replacement level would get to. So if you got a really slow left fielder who's maybe not making errors because he doesn't ever get to the ball quick enough to make a play on it, so it just always gets in front of him, that guy's going to cost you runs throughout a season that would be reflected in your ERA.
Absolutely. And we've known for a long time that starting pitcher ERA is more important than reliever ERA. I think most fans that follow baseball understand relievers come in highly leveraged situations, men on base. It's not a clean start of their own making. So their ERAs are actually normally higher than those of starting pitchers.
Mostly because you're getting put into situations where it's more immediately at jeopardy.
But the additional stats, as I think you were alluding to, things like ERA plus and
FIP,
fielding independent of pitching, this helps you evaluate pitchers. And I would agree with you that ERA, I think it's such a good traditional stat because you can go back to the beginning of baseball.
And the thing is also still at the end of the day, unlike a lot of statistics, you can't kind of accidentally luck your way into a good ERA.
Right. You had to have been a good pitcher.
Like you can kind of luck your way in with some of the wins. We've all seen the random reliever that's like 8-0 at the All-Star break, who's leading the major league in wins with like a 6 ERA because he just happened to be like, oh, I was the pitcher of record and my team won a bunch of games late.
I think it might have been the '86 season. I'm not sure. The Mets had a reliever named Terry Leach, and I think he was like 10-1. Terry Leach was not a great pitcher.
No, but you could just luck.
Got into the right situation at the right time.
You're never going to have a 2.0 ERA by mistake.
Absolutely. You have to be a good pitcher in order to be able to do that. So
you can have you have to have a good year because like Rick Porcello had that year where he won the Cy Young, had like a 2-something ERA. Not ever going to happen again.
No, somebody was impersonating him, if you ask me, actually. I don't really think that's, that's in any question. So I lied because I had one more, and it's a really good one. So saves.
Oh, no, it's worthless.
And I'll associate saves and holds together. So saves, now, interestingly enough, saves did not come into play as an official statistic until 1969. Mm-hmm. So what they've done is they went back before that.
And like
because retroactively awarded guys saves. So now you have Elroy Face of the 59, Pirates, who was a good relief pitcher, and he now is accredited with saves that he never got in a box score or never was paid for as a pitcher at the time. I think that's
I think that it's interesting with saves. I think it's less that it's not a valuable statistic and more we just overvalued it as a statistic because we let it dictate who the best relievers were when really that's not how it works. Because if I bring in a guy in the 8th inning, let's say it's a 3-0 game. First and second, no outs in the 8th inning. I bring in a guy and he gets me out of it without giving up any runs. And then the closer comes in the 9th and gets a 1-2-3 inning. Who is actually more important to protecting the lead that game?
Who pitched the more highly leveraged situation?
The guy in the 8th inning. The guy in the 8th inning. The other guy really didn't have that much of it. He's just like, okay, yeah, don't let in 3 runs from the clean inning. That's actually pretty easy.
And managers are aware of this, obviously, because increasingly you'll see the number 1 relief pitcher come in at a time that isn't at the closing of the game. They'll bring in Josh Hader in the 7th inning to get the outs that they need because
there's no longer this weird sort of mystique that somehow the 9th inning is the most important inning, because it really isn't. The most important inning is whatever one you're in, because that's all you really care about. You wouldn't, and that's what people are starting to figure out. That's why you see Josh Hader coming in the 7th instead of the 9th, because it doesn't matter if Josh Hader is there to pitch the 9th. If you blow the game in the 7th, then he can't be effective later on.
And that would be actually, he would get a hold in that situation, and so that holds are also an even newer stat than saves. And holds, are actually more important in comparison to saves than people value, because they're not as far apart as you might think.
It's basically the same thing.
Right.
The only thing we've done with the save is being like, oh, it's in the 9th inning. It's special.
Well, we came up with the idea that, okay, so you could have a pitcher pitch 5 innings. Okay, 3 pitchers, each pitch 1 inning. Don't give up any runs on a 1-run game. And then a closer comes in and gets the outs. You've got a win, 3 holds, and a save in the same game. That's overstating as far as I'm concerned.
A little much.
So I think that, holds and saves are something that, and going back and retroactively awarding players with saves and all that. So, it's what was K-Rod, I think, still has the record, right? It was 62 for one season. And that was sort of like the height of when saves value were really thought the most important. But guys get into the Hall of Fame on the basis of aggregate saves.
Well, generally a guy that's part of it just because, well, not really, because how many guys have gotten in based on aggregate saves? There's not a lot of Hall of Fame closers.
There's not a lot of Hall of Fame closers. There are guys that I think
especially
could be close. Billy Wagner would be one of them.
Yeah, Billy Wagner would be Billy Wagner gets in if you value the saves.
Right, and at the time he pitched, the save was critically important. So it was thought to be critically important.
Correct.
Yeah, so I think that saves are going to be a historical reference, but they're less important going forward because of the way pitchers are being used.
Right.
So you're not going to pay people on the basis of the fact that he had 41 saves, or last year he had 39, or vice versa, whatever it would be.
And really what this hurts is the people that this hurts the most are the former 8th inning setup guys that used to get a fat contract to go close for some other team. Now that's not going to happen as much. You're just going to get a fat contract to go be a reliever for another team.
So let's do a few hitting stats. This is one that came about only for the 80s, and it's not a stat now, and I think you're aware of it. It is a game-winning RBI.
Oh, God, that sounds like a pointless statistic.
and because it only lasted, I think, about 8 or 9 years, from like 80 to 89, the all-time leader in game-winning RBIs when they recorded the stat is one Keith Hernandez.
I mean, it's a completely pointless statistic for measuring anything other than, wow, that guy was kind of clutch.
So here it is. Right? It's a 0-0 game.
Yeah,
it's the 2nd inning. And there's a runner on third base, and Keith Hernandez dribbles a ball to the right side. The runner scores. Second out at first base. 1-0 game. Keith Hernandez.
That counts. That's counted.
Game-winning RBI.
Oh, that's even less valuable. I thought it would only apply to situations where you literally won the game on the walk-off
hit that gave your team the lead. It never relinquished.
Oh God, no, that's awful. It'd be like, oh, I kept track of all the basketball players that hit shots that gave their team the lead. That'd be who would care about that? Yeah,
a little different in baseball, but I get your point. Yeah.
Sorry, I just see no meaning in that.
No,
stat.
And that's why
it went away.
Major League Baseball said, "Well, this is a dumb stat. We should get rid of this."
Yeah.
So, but traditional stats like batting average,
will always be valuable.
Same importance as always. I would tend. How about RBIs?
Less valuable.
Why?
It's an extension of your team.
Okay, elaborate.
Well, think about it. If you have a guy that's on a bad team hitting third and he's got two guys on front of him that don't have good on-base percentage, he just naturally has less chances to get RBIs than a guy on a good team with guys in front of him. So you as a player don't have direct control over the number of RBIs you realistically get because you can't get RBIs that other guys actually having had success in front of you first. So I think it's a
measurement.
It's a measurement. It's not a good analysis.
You know, Hack Wilson has the all-time record for RBIs in a season in 1930. For the Cubs, he had 190 RBIs. You don't get lucky getting 100. He had an amazing season that year. It was by far his best season. And so you know that's such an old stat, RBIs in general, and that particular stat, that it's kind of fun from a historical basis to look at how many RBIs
I think
people
get. It's fun to look at and it's fun to evaluate, but I would never be like, oh, wow, that guy didn't get 100 RBIs this season.
Right, you're not going to get dinged.
You shouldn't get dinged because you didn't get.
It's situational, and I completely agree. On base average, relatively new
If anything, that's gone up in value because what people have realized is the most premium value thing in baseball is base runners and outs. So if you have a guy that gets on base, that's very valuable. Doesn't matter how, because him getting on base is not him making an out.
How about, okay, and this is one that I think I know what you're going to say. Runners in scoring position with less than 2 out, or how the batter's average with runners in scoring.
Oh, that's super valuable.
Okay.
Because that has context.
Okay.
Everybody has because the only thing that matters in that is the sample size, the size of the data that you have. So
right, you might not get that many opportunities.
So I'm going to judge a player depending on how many opportunities they have, the size of the data set. I think that's an incredibly valuable.
Kind of like a clutch measurement, right?
It's a clutch. It's going to tell you which guys when there are. Now the thing is, in the context of even a single season, it might not really tell you that much about a guy. But if you look over a 5 or an 8 year period of a guy's career, specifically on his average with runners in scoring position with any amount of outs, that's going to tell you a lot
Joey
about
Votto's is pretty good.
Yeah.
Right. So you can pick players that you know are good players, have been for a long time, and there's a really good chance that the reason they're good players, that's something that they do very well. So, you know, when I was talking to you about this particular episode, actually started with a stat I haven't even brought up yet.
Yeah, kind of one of the biggest ones, and one that I think is less a victim of being irrelevant due to the poor nature of what it's measuring and more relevant just due to the way the game has changed.
Okay, actually, I'm not sure I'm following. Go ahead.
Well, the stolen bases.
Okay, yeah.
Because stolen bases, I think they have not become devalued because the statistic in and of itself is bad, but rather because we don't steal bases anymore.
Well, and are players faster or slower than they were? Chances are,
faster.
Overall, they're faster.
But I'd also say catchers' pop times are much faster.
Okay, and arm strength?
Better. And it's just such a bad play percentage-wise.
Well, yes, in that I think the rule is around 80%. If you're not successful 4 out of 5 times stealing a base, you're probably hurting your team more than you're helping it. And very few guys. Trey Turner is a guy who steals about 83% of his bases, and he is one
of the best.
Talked about.
Think about it. He's
maybe making 75 steals this season, which nobody has gotten 78 steals since Jose Reyes.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Right, and that was in 2007, and before that it was 92. A guy named Marquise Grissom, who I don't know if you ever heard of.
I've heard of him.
And so before that it was 1988. We're talking. No one has stolen that.
Was that Coleman?
That was Vince Coleman, yes. So, and that was when Henderson was
still
stealing 93 bases.
You think about it, you had like Coleman, I think Henderson, because Henderson, what was his record for most steals in a season?
130.
So Henderson stole 130 bases and is most in a season. Last year, the top team in the majors, I think, was the Indians with 135 steals.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So think about the difference there. Ricky Henderson almost outstole the leading team in the majors last season.
And what I remember about Henderson only is that how often he stole third base. And I think they don't really see guys do that as much.
Actually talking about that. That's a more valuable play.
Particularly with less than 2 outs.
With less than 2 outs than stealing second.
Right.
Because and the reason why I think that you've seen guys why stolen bases have gotten devalued so much is 1, catchers are better at throwing guys out. 2, we place a much higher premium on every out that you get, and having an out where you essentially create an out without having the batter swing is very bad. especially because you already had a guy on base. So you've taken your advantage and wiped it away without really allowing anything positive to happen for yourself.
And I think that's why there's stop signs up, and maybe there's a few players like Billy Hamilton who has a
but Billy
green
Hamilton,
light.
he's not really even a starter now.
Well, you know the old saying about a guy like Billy Hamilton: you can't steal first.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it. And I think also when you look at like your steals, I think a big issue with them is that it's such a momentum breaker for your team. Having your guy get caught stealing is such a deflating thing for your inning that
I think there's context there. It depends on when in the game it is.
And then this was the other thing I was thinking of saying. I also think it has to do with the change in the way that guys swing the bat. Mm-hmm. Guys are now intentionally trying to launch the ball, specifically using launch angles to put air under the ball to try and elevate it.
There are very few slap hitters.
You don't have guys. Whereas before, you were almost instructed to hit the ball into the ground. You wanted to be level through the ball and drive it down on a line. So that meant you had more ball. That meant hit and run was a lot less dangerous because it was way less likely the guy was going to pop the ball up.
So it's gone so far from what it used to be. In 2019, the last full season, the National League leader in stolen bases was Ronald Acuna. He had a whopping 37.
So the last full season we would have Whit Merrifield.
Merrifield
was the AL leader.
Right.
He would have had like almost close to 50.
I think he stole the year before, and then because Malik Smith, who is a Met now, had 46 for Tampa,
and he was like the
2009,
leader,
and he led the league with 46. And I don't know why there are people talking about Trey Turner stealing 75 bases this year. I don't know
because it doesn't.
Where's that going to come from?
Right, because it's like he doesn't. He's never even been. It's not like he's had a bunch of seasons where he's been at like 50 or 60, and he gets because he does get hurt all the time.
That guy's a terrific player. In fact, that's one of the reasons why you may not want to run a guy so much, because stealing bases, sliding in there wears you down.
You get hurt a lot. There's a lot.
You get hurt. It wears your body down. It'll affect your performance at the plate and at shortstop in the field.
Because it's stealing a base is essentially go to your absolute top speed and then stop really suddenly.
But I think, and it should be interesting with 76-year-old Tony La Russa managing in Chicago this year for the White Sox, because when he was managing, the stolen base was a much bigger part of the game than it is today. And I wonder if he is going to consider trying to get the White Sox to run a little bit more.
I think the more interesting thing would be if teams especially continue to shift with guys on base, what is stealing like with the shift present? I think teams haven't explored that option enough, and that's a way you can potentially start breaking shifts.
Well, they will have a defensive change. If there's a runner on base, they're going to alter the shift to make sure they're not leaving the base uncovered.
Right, the base isn't going to be uncovered, but it's much different if, let's say, you've got a guy on first base and you've got that lefty shift up, so the third baseman's essentially standing at what is shortstop. If he's the one forced to take that throw from the catcher, you might take that bet going, this guy's not going to be used to having to pick this ball, because it is... As much as you think it wouldn't be different, it is very different receiving that throw at second compared to at third. And so he's not going to be as fluid and as smooth with it. So you might look at it and go, okay, you know what? I bet we can catch him sleeping here.
And I guess if in fact the ball this season is not quite as live as some people have been saying, it's maybe going to fly a couple of feet less if they are standardizing this, that might be just enough to have people start saying, maybe we should try running a little bit more and doing this. I just feel like there's been such inattention on the stolen base, and we've gotten to the statistical mindset of saying, okay, he better make 80%. If he doesn't, it's a bad play, and people are just not bothering. And managers are just not bothering with it at all.
And especially because you also run into the issue that typically your fastest guys are going to be the top of the order, and if they're the top of the order, they also have the best hitters behind them. And why are you going to take the bat out of your best hitter's hands by having some guy steal in front of him?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And while the power part of the game has become so important, you don't want to take your chance out of a guy hitting a home run to give you the run without having to run around the bases and steal him.
Exactly. And if you're the Mets or you're any team, if your number one guy gets on base, are you really going to have him try and steal second when the three hitter's up with one out? When he got thrown out and now it's 2 outs in the 3-hitter out.
I think we'd agree it's an exciting play in baseball. I'd like to see more of it. I'm not convinced we're going to.
I think it's the kind of thing like sacrifice bunts. It'll just become more of a strategic tool within a team's arsenal and less about measuring who's the best at it.
So I'll just a quick stat. I always remember this because I'm a stat geek. 2 players share the season record for steals of home in one season. season. Neither of those players, by the way, is named Jackie Robinson, in case you were thinking that.
So my initial guess for one of them is Ty Cobb.
That's a really good guess. It isn't Ty Cobb.
Oh, okay.
But it's a really good guess. It was Pete Reiser of the Dodgers.
Yeah, I would have never gotten that one.
You know, and
who?
Pete Reiser.
Yeah.
He was a Dodger.
Pete Rose's cousin?
No. Stealing home in the 60s, Rod Carew stole home 7 times. And just the idea that a guy would even try to steal home 7 times, much less be successful, that's a different era in baseball, obviously.
Yeah,
how often do you see a guy try to steal home? It's like something
like,
weird usually happens.
Usually it's like once a season. For all of the majors, a guy will try and steal home. That's like a once the entire season, you'll get one guy that does it. And usually because it's like some fast guy and you've got a left-handed pitcher on the mound who's not really paying attention. And he's just like, oh, I'm going to be able to get like halfway down the line. He's not looking over here. Okay, I'm just going to go.
Well, and Jackie Robinson was known for taunting the pitchers, when he was playing from the 40s into the 50s, where he would, kind of gesture to the pitcher and get off the base, and try to catch. And at that time, it did rattle the pitcher because nobody did it. So it really did affect what was going on, and he could disrupt their rhythm, which was as important as stealing the base itself a lot of the time.
Yeah, you just had because just getting the guy focused on you was a win in of itself.
But I think pitchers are much smarter about that now. They work on plays like that. If you're dancing around on third base, if you they're going to pick you off.
And the other thing is, catchers' arms are so good now. You're playing around like that.
Throws.
He's just going to snap it right behind you, and you're dead in the water because the thing about those snap throws is no human's reaction on a snap throw is to keep going in the direction you were. You're almost always going to react by trying to get back to the base.
So I wrote down a few more stats, but I don't think these are important at all. But it was something that we used to evaluate players. Outfield assists was a way that you would.
Again, it's like a lot of these old stats where what you're seeing is the stats that relied on other things on the field happening are what's being devalued. So you can't have an outfield assist without a guy being in a position to get the assist on. So that it's a less valuable statistic because it's so happenstance based on whether or not you get the opportunity to do that.
I think we talked about it in the last show, and we said, the fielder goes after the ball, doesn't catch a ball he should have caught, picks it up on one hop, fires to second base, and gets the guy out at second, trying to stretch a single into a double. Hitter gets a single, the fielder gets an assist, an outfield assist.
Which should have never happened to begin with.
Caught the ball.
Yeah.
So that's why that it is contingent upon other things, and I think that's a good point. They would, and I don't. This is not an important stat, but it was something that you'd evaluate. Pickoff plays, right?
That almost has more value because that actually shows you how good a pitcher's move is, most likely.
If Andy Pettitte has a shot at the fame, it's on the back of his balk pickoff move
because it was one of the best ones.
One of the best I've ever seen. And people. So that could be the thing that eventually puts
him over the edge.
Yeah, exactly. So and they also, and I don't really understand why. This is a really strange stat. They would actually measure guys' putouts.
That's stupid.
All right, so you catch the ball.
That literally everything we've been saying. Putouts is entirely like, they hit the ball.
Somebody threw the ball to me and I stepped on the base. I get credit for a putout.
What does that matter? Like, I'd rather look at your fielding percentage because at least that tells me how often you mess up.
So I think it'll be interesting to see if other stats come in beyond these advanced stats that we're using now.
The issue is that I think you're going to see is that one of the things that all these sort of outdated statistics have going for them is they're very easy to comprehend, and a lot of these more advanced statistics you need like a math degree to understand what's happening on half of them. So that's going to be something for a lot of these people that are creating all these advanced stats. How do we explain them in a more concise manner? Because FIP, fielding independent of pitching, is not an easy statistic to explain. WAR is not an easy statistic to explain, but they're so much better at representing what actually occurs.
And I think if you're going to compare things, and then one of my favorite things about baseball is the fact that you can look back over 160 years and look at statistics that are still important today, and you can measure, even if it's not the exact same game, the statistics are the same, and it's just interesting to look and see how things have changed, and you don't want to lose that connection to the history.
And that's why we always go back to our grand thesis of what we've never been able to accurately describe or look into, but we've always thought was really curious is, did batters back when because we brought it up earlier in this episode with complete games, that guys used to literally throw the whole game every single game. So for guys like Babe Ruth that played back in like the 1930s.
Or Ty Cobb with a career average of 366.
how much better were their averages in the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings compared to the first 6 innings? Because you're facing now the same pitcher who's pitched the whole game, every game, all the time. I have to think that had an effect, and we'll never really know.
And I think it'd be really and we've tried this, and it's just because it requires you going through box scores, but they don't necessarily give you box scores that would have what the player did when.
You need the actual scorebook from literally every game in baseball history.
And I would tend to think that Cobb will show up really strongly there because of his style of hitting compared to Ruth. Because if you're trying to just slap the ball, hit the ball, put the ball in play as Cobb was wanted to do, he did lead the league in home runs one year, but it was like with 9.
Yeah, true. It would be power explosion right there
in the dead ball era. That is something that he should he would get more hits, I would say, than a free swinger like Babe Ruth.
Yeah, who just drove the ball.
Who just drove the ball far. So we have one more off-season episode, as we mentioned before, and that's going to be our first guest, and we will drop that in a couple of weeks, and then on April 1st we will drop the first episode in the new season, episode 2, and that will be our season preview.
Yeah, for opening day, we'll have an opening day preview.
So if you've got any ideas for an episode, please send it in, and we look forward to getting back with you next time.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at AlmostCoop.